Is the labour market flexible and inclusive enough for the green transition? Are women sufficiently represented in decision-making positions in the environment and climate sectors? And for a green future, what steps can we take in education, health and care? In this year's edition of the Gender Equality Index, EIGE looks at where the European Green Deal and gender equality meet. Why does it matter? Europe aims to be a climate-neutral continent by 2050. It's possible, but it comes with challenges. To get there, the EU Green Deal should consider everyone's needs, especially those who are impacted the most by the green transition. Where do we stand, and how can we move forward? Join us on 24th of October 2023 online and find out from high-level EU policymakers, gender equality experts and practitioners, and follow hashtag EIGE Index on social media for the latest updates. Together for a green and gender equal Europe.
Hello and welcome to the Gender Equality Index 2023 conference organized by the European Institute for Gender Equality from the European Parliament. My name is Federica Di Sario. I'm a climate reporter at Politico Europe and I will be your host today. So the focus of the index this year is all about sustainability and the green energy transition, because we know that women in all their diversities can reap huge profits and benefits as the EU embarks on its net zero journey. But to do so, there needs to be sufficient focus on the climate and the gender dimensions. So just a word on practicalities. This event is fully virtual, which means that you can watch us either on EIGE's website or on YouTube. But now let me give you a flavor of what to expect. Today we have a total of 3 sessions and 1 panel discussion to explore the findings of the Gender Equality Index 2023. We will explore the progress that has been achieved so far, and we will look at what remains to be done. So we will start by discussing how the Green Deal policies and gender equality are strictly interwoven with 2 high-level panelists. We'll have Caroline Schiele. She is the director of the European Institute for Gender Equality, EIGE. And also Kim Leonard-Smouter. He's the Director General of the European Network Against Racism. Welcome both. Thank you. Hello. Then we will proceed to the part that I'm sure most of you are waiting for, which is having a presentation about the findings of the Gender Equality Index 2023. And this will be done thanks to one of EIGE's senior experts. Next, we will take a deep dive in the lingering gender gaps in unpaid care. This is a tremendously important topic, but sadly also one of the most disregarded ones, and usually because of a lack of data. And last but not least, we'll then have a high-level panel discussion. We will have speakers from the governments, from the academia, from the financial sector, and even from the European Parliament itself. And after having heard everything we have discussed before, we will try to define the policies that are already being taken to bridge the gender gaps, and we will have a look at what remains to be done. But now, before we start the first session, please let me remind you that the interpretation in the international sign language is also available. And also, I would like to encourage you to start thinking about the questions that you would like to ask our speakers, because there will be several occasions during the conference to submit those questions through Slido, and I'll do my best to ask as many questions as possible. But now, I'm very excited to welcome to the studio again Caroline Schiele, Director at EIGE, and Kim Smouter. Director General at the European Network Against Racism again. My first question is for Caroline. You have been at the lead of EIGE for the past 3 years, and all your career has been about advising EU institutions on how to better capture and how to better make sure that a gender perspective is incorporated across several policies. My question would be, why do you think it's so important that we move towards a green and gender equal Europe?
Well, thank you, Frederica, for this question. And to be honest, this is a topic that is very dear to my heart. When we speak about climate change, what I see is that for many people it's overwhelming. There's many things happening that we simply do not understand, let alone that we would understand the connection between gender equality and the Green Deal and climate change. And maybe I can share with you a personal experience that I had years ago, when I had never thought about any connection between gender equality and climate change. And this was when I was back in 2006 in New York for negotiations in the Commission on the Status of Women. And we were talking about participation of women in society and the barriers for them. And as the EU, we negotiate as an EU together. And suddenly one of the developing countries who was also in the room spoke about how in their country, due to the lack of rain and the very dry seasons, people who usually went to the water wells to get water, they had to walk longer distances to get the needed water. And then that man said, listen, it's mostly girls and women who leave on a daily basis to get that water. And they're easily victims of sexual assault. So for me, that was the first time to really understand that there is a link between climate change and the daily life of people, of women and men, boys and girls, and also the effects of climate change on gender equality, because it's horrible if you think that if you need water, you go and get it, you might be sexually assaulted. You're not safe. So this was for me really an eye-opener, and I hope that today when we share the results of the index and also in the years to come, we will also provide those eye-openers to everyone who's working on the issue of climate change and Green Deal and anyone beyond. It's important that we understand this. My second remark is, if we speak about a social and fair transition, for me and for EIGE it means that we should leave no one behind. And one important topic that comes to the table very often now is energy poverty, lack of energy, but also energy poverty. Many of the measures that governments are taking to combat climate change, they cost money. At the same time, we know that people in poverty in the European Union are often women. There's again a link. Yeah. So, and my third remark in this sense is that I would like to speak about responsibility. It is important that more women participate in the renewable energy sector, that we have a more equal share of recycling responsibilities at home, more gender balance in environmental decision making, and safer, sustainable public transport. And our data today, I hope that we help to show, to give the evidence that there is still much room for improvement, because women are not visible. And maybe to end my response, Frederica, I think we all have a responsibility in combating climate change. And I hope also in today's discussions it will become clear how also at an individual level, as citizens, we can add to combating climate change. I will leave it to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for giving us such a personal answer as well. And now coming to you, Kim, I have a kind of similar question, because we all agree with that, but I really want to understand from you, why do you think it's so important that governments now act on this swift implementation of the Green Deal policies? We know that the EU institutions have worked on tons of climate legislations, but why is it important that in their implementation they do it in an inclusive way?
Thank you for the question, and I think it goes back to Carolina's point around the very poignant story about developing countries and that impact. Well, that impact is not just in developing countries, and I think that's also why it's so important for us to be looking at the climate change agenda as not just an issue which is about fixing and ensuring that the temperatures go down to the right level, but that actually in order to make the systemic changes that are required to make climate change a reality, or to stop climate change from becoming a reality, you need to be taking into account many different dimensions, and one of which is the social dimension. We at the European Network Against Racism have been looking very closely at that intersection, that interlink between discriminations and climate change. And there's two reasons why that's really important. One, the first reason I think is what we were talking about, so really the issue of resilience and the ability of certain communities to actually be able to react to the changes and the impact that climate change will have on communities. And that's not something which is theoretical, it's happening already today. So energy poverty is an example of that. But we also see certainly in the placement of certain products and services in underprivileged communities and the health impact that it has and the long-term impact it has on the ability of certain communities to develop. So there is a very strong interlink between the policies that are being put in place, the ability of communities to be resilient to the change that is coming, and the importance that government have to play in ensuring that they're, in anticipating what those changes might be, in ensuring that services are being delivered to communities which are really not prepared for the kinds of changes that we're going to be seeing, but also to accompany and to ensure that marginalized groups are actually heard and are actually part of the conversation. Because one of the other issues that we're seeing is that a lot of the new changes that are being implemented to try to address climate change are not being done in partnership with marginalized communities. And so what you're seeing is that there's also increasing resistance to efforts to try to curb climate change because, in fact, marginalized communities see that things are being imposed upon them as opposed to being discussed with them. And the dimension then becomes really important because those who are least heard are often marginalized women, and their lived experiences, how they're experiencing climate change is not being heard, and it's important for governments to listen to that and to ensure that the policies are not being done against them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Kim, for raising this important aspect. Indeed, we need to develop policies that are also, it's not simply that they need to be implemented in an inclusive way, but they also need to be drafted in an inclusive way. That's a right point. And now, Caroline, back to you. I mean, we are here because of the release of the Gender Equality Index, which I'm sure involved a lot of data crunching. So my question is about the role of data. How important do you think it is to have the right data to drive evidence-based policymaking to tackle gender inequalities?
Well, action stems from knowledge. And I have been a policy advisor, and I have been working on policies on gender equality in my country back home. And I mean, you simply cannot do this without data and evidence. I take it that every government wants to develop the best policies ever for their citizens. And if that's your goal, then you need to understand what are the needs of women and men in all their diversity in your member state. And I mean, as a director of the Knowledge Center on Gender Equality in the European Union, I can only stress how important our data and evidence are. And going back to the Green Deal, as I said before, for many it's such a complicated issue as such, climate change and the Green Deal. And also, to be honest, if I may say so, when I look at the text of the Green Deal, it's very difficult to find any references to gender equality. Mm-hmm. So the more important it is that we as an institute, how we make visible what are the needs of men and women in society. And in that area, we focus now mostly on energy and transport. So what we will do, we will provide the relevant evidence and data for all member states and governments, but also for the European Union, to really reflect on the actual needs and situations, the status quo of women and men in all their diversity in the European Union, because only if you use that data and evidence, you're able to respond adequately to your policies. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kim, also very similar question about the importance of data, because I think you also have a background in social research, so who better than you can tell us how important it is to have the right data and research at hand, and what they can allow us to do in terms of tackling gender inequalities.
Yeah, I mean, equality data is so important, as was mentioned, and I think for a number of reasons. I think one of the reasons why it's very important is, first of all, to measure actually how big the problem is. And without data, it's very difficult to actually understand, are we dealing with an issue which is affecting a particular group, the entire community? Is it a big issue, small issue? Without data, we have just anecdotal evidence, which is inadequate in order to create new policies. Data is also really important, not just to measure the status quo. It's also very important to measure, are we actually progressing in the direction that we think they're progressing? And for us, that's another reason why it's very important to have data sets available. It is also one of the reasons we're actually fighting very hard to ensure that as the European institutions are thinking about the collecting and the reporting of data, for example, by private sector, to ensure that they're meeting their ESG requirements, that they actually also think about the equality dimension of it. Because if you actually are trying to address climate change, you need to also be thinking about equality elements. You need to be understanding how these different measures are actually creating a true impact across the board. Data is really helpful to actually determine that. Without data, you're not able to detect the nuances, and you actually might be working with lots of blind spots, and that's what data is really great for. Data is great for identifying these are the blind spots. It's great for identifying, are we actually making progress? And without it, we might still be thinking that we're doing a huge, lots of changes, but actually data often shows the opposite. And I would also add, it's often an excellent way to also talk about the things which are not talked about. So there are lots of discussions which might be taboo. But by having it through data, we are actually able to release and to reveal taboos which may not even be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And now, Caroline, another question to you. So you mentioned before the fact that everybody can do something about gender equality. It doesn't really need to be policymakers. Of course, it's very recommended that policymakers become more sensitive towards the issue, but it's not just about them. It's also businesses, it's also academia, and just individuals like you and me. So can you tell us, just trying to be very tangible, very concrete, what would be your 3 steps forward to help Europe go towards a more gender equal version of itself?
Yeah, thank you. Before I move to the 3 steps forward that EIGE wants to share today, maybe I first explain why we launched that campaign 3 Steps Forward last year, because I realized that in many of my interventions, also in the past years when I spoke about the results of the Gender Equality Index, I realized that often I said, listen, we take 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And not only is that, of course, a very, let's say, depressing message, but I also realized that with all the knowledge not only EIGE has, but many of us have, if we join forces, we can really make a change. So that's why, as an institute, we decided to invite, let's say, everyone to formulate their 3 steps forward. So policymakers, governments, ministers, everyone who wants to participate in our campaign, please formulate your 3 steps forward. For us, it's hope-based communication, because we really think that on the basis of data and information, and with our knowledge and capacities, we can really make a change. But we also should join forces in that. So we launched that campaign last year. We invited many of our, let's say, allies to formulate their 3 steps forward. They do this on social media. And it gives a new spirit. It gives a spirit of hope, of really realizing we can make a change. So, and if it comes down to EIGE, what I can tell you is that our 3 steps forward are, and will continue to be, we will continue to provide evidence. That's the first step. So data and information that are extremely relevant. The second step, we will continue to build coalitions. and to engage in conversations as we do today. And we will specifically also focus on the Green Deal and gender equality in the coming years. And finally, we will share our know-how. We will provide concrete tools that anyone can use to implement gender equality in their portfolio and specifically also in the Green Deal policies. And we will also share good practices. So that's the 3 steps forward that I would like to put on the table today. And you can count on EIGE for that.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And now, I guess, same question to you, Kim. So what would be your 3 steps forward? And also on behalf, of course, of the European Network Against Racism.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think there's the 3 steps forward. The first one, I think, is around ensuring that the voices of the unheard are actually heard. And I think for us, it's really building and working with civil society, grassroots organizations, ensuring that they are equipped and that they are able to actually influence the debate and that they are given enough space to actually make their cases heard, particularly here in at the European level. I think that's really an important one. The second one, I think, for us is really telling also and ensuring and collating the information about the impact that actually climate change is already having on marginalized communities throughout Europe and making that story heard. So we've actually published a year ago a report which made the intersection between racial justice and climate justice. And we're going to continue that journey to expand our knowledge and our understanding of how these different elements are interacting with each other and creating, unfortunately, negative results for our communities. The third one, I think, is, and I join EIGE, it's around if we're looking to create and achieve systemic change, then we need the system to work in unison. And to make that happen, we need broader coalitions. We need to involve civil society organizations. We need to work with governments. We need to work with think tanks. We need to work with private sector. And all of us need to work together in order to actually ensure that we're not leaving anyone behind. And that's, for us, our 3 important steps forward to actually make a lasting systemic change, which ensures that, in 25 years, we are talking about a very different reality.
And we hope so. Thank you so much, both. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Kim. And now it's time to speak about the findings of the Gender Equality Index 2023 itself. But first, let's watch a short video together about the index.
The Gender Equality Index measures the progress of gender equality across the European Union. The index is a composite indicator, meaning that it combines multiple dimensions of gender equality into one easily understandable measure. Every year, the index scores the EU and the member states from 1 to 100, where 100 means full gender equality. This allows member states to easily track and compare advancements and understand areas that need improvement. For over a decade, the Gender Equality Index has looked at core areas of life: work, money, knowledge, time, power, health. These domains are critical for gender equality. Let's take a closer look. Work measures how equal the access is for women and men to employment and good working conditions. Where do we stand in terms of participation in full-time employment, quality of work, and career prospects? Money looks at women's and men's economic situation and their access to financial resources. Are there differences in income? What is the gap in income distribution between the top and bottom earners? And what about those at risk of poverty? Knowledge focuses on the participation in education and training over the course of a life. What percentage of men and women is graduating from universities, and what are the fields they are graduating from? Time spent doing care, domestic work, and social activities is another key area. What is the percentage of women and men looking after children or a family member in need? And how do women and men dedicate time to household chores and cooking versus engaging in sports, culture, or leisure? Power measures gender equality in decision-making positions across the political, economic, and social spheres. What is the representation of women and men in national parliaments, government, corporate boards, media, research, and sports? Health assesses gender equality in 3 health-related aspects: health status, health behaviour, and access to health services. How healthy do women and men think they are? How long are they likely to live? How healthy are their lifestyles? Beyond these core areas, and not captured in the calculations of the score, the Gender Equality Index also examines the diverse realities that different groups of women and men face in the EU based on age, level of education, disability, country of birth, and family types, such as single parents or couples with children, and tracks the extent of the most common and documented forms of violence against women. Discover the index on EIGE's website.
Welcome back to the Gender Equality Index 2023 conference. It's now time to talk about the index itself. And it's a very special moment for EIGE this year because it marks the 10 years since EIGE started publishing the Gender Equality Index. And as in any big occasions, it's time to look back and take stock of what we have achieved so far, and also understand what needs to be done. I'm very happy to be joined here in the studio by Jolanta Reinkerte. She's a senior specialist at EIGE, and she will present us the main findings and the main takeaways of the index this year. Hi, Jolanta, the floor is yours.
This year is a big year for us. We celebrate 10 years of the Gender Equality Index. Much has happened over the years, and multiple crises are still ongoing as we speak. Still, progress and change have happened. We see improvements in the work-life balance, pay transparency, more gender balance on corporate boards, significant moves to end violence against women and domestic violence. European Union agreed on its first care strategy, a cause for celebration, indeed. Yet the job is far from completed. Let's see what index shows us. Gender Equality Index looks at gender inequalities within a range of areas that are relevant for the European Union policy framework. For the first time, the index incorporates EIGE's survey data on care. It sheds new light on the domain of time, which hasn't been updated since 2016. This year index also focuses on socially fair green transition in transport and energy, and discusses at length the challenges and opportunities it opens for gender equality. Now, I can reveal this year's index score. Let's see where we stand. The European Union score for gender equality is 70.2 out of 100. This is a tiny increase of 1.6 points in 1 year. Since 2010, the index score has increased by just over 7 points at a rate of 0.6 per year. Sweden, the Netherlands, and Denmark are Europe's top performers this year. Sweden leads the ranking in the last 10 years, although its score has dropped in the last year. The Netherlands jumped a spot to gain the second place since the last year. Belgium, Spain, and Denmark also made to the top 5 countries in the EU. Improvement is most needed in Romania, Hungary, and Czechia. Now, to use a sports terminology, so in a short distance, the biggest improvement is made in Greece, Portugal, and Bulgaria. But in the longer distance, the countries that improved the most since 2010 are Italy, Portugal, Luxembourg, and Malta. However, Sweden is the only country to exceed 80 points. And I need to conclude here that it's only 2% of the European Union population is in the home stretch to achieve gender equality. For the European Union, this is far too slow to make it a fair place for everyone. This leads to whether the countries are converging in gender equality. Overall, since 2010, we see that the differences between member states are decreasing, but let's take a closer look. We have 8 countries, mostly in the south of Europe, and also Lithuania, with faster improvements in the last 10 years, basically catching up with the EU average. 7 countries with already higher levels of gender equality, for example, Nordic countries, but also Belgium, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Slovenia, are flattening and moving forward very slowly. We are proud of 5 outperforming countries which exceed the EU average and progress more rapidly. These are Austria, Germany, Spain, France, and Luxembourg. And finally, the remaining 7 countries are slowly moving forward, but they remain consistently and significantly lower than the EU average. So as you can see from the map, countries with the lower levels of gender equality are progressing more rapidly, while top-performing countries are slowing down. Now, let's have a look at what index tells us in several domains. Let's start from the domain of time, which closed the major data gap and allows us now to observe changes in unpaid care and also social activities in the last 7 years. Between women and men in the EU, there is a greater balance in care for children below 12, but there isn't when it comes to the intensity of care and type of task. As you can see, men are mostly engaged in care for up to 3 hours a day, while every second woman does the bulk of the most intensive care for more than 5 hours a day. When it comes to specific care activities, gender gaps are biggest in personal and physical care and also emotional support. These are routine tasks, so time-demanding, physically and mentally demanding tasks that still fall heavily on women, and regardless of their income, education, or migration background. Although the evidence allows us to speak of increased fathers' engagement in childcare over past years, this is not the case with the housework. If we compare with data of 2006, the data provided by Eurofound, gender gap among couples with children have indeed reduced considerably. We see a decrease of 24 percentage points. But here comes the most important point. Gender gaps in care are slowly narrowing now, not because men are doing more, we see an increase of 5 percentage points, but because women are doing considerably less. And this can be explained by most likely increasing use of assisting technologies at home and expanding home delivery services, also increased women's participation in employment. All these could have contributed to this change. But we cannot outsource everything to technology. Technology in itself will not resolve structural issues such as gender norms. An index thematic focus gives a very particular attention to climate change and care. Women already bear disproportional responsibility for unpaid care work, and as the effects of climate change intensify, care obligations will further increase. And similarly, higher pressure will be put on already overburdened formal care systems. You will hear more about it during the day. Now let's look at what is often overlooked in the work-life balance debates. It's time left for self-care. Since 2015, the gender gap has doubled. What it basically means, it means that due to gender care gaps and increasing women's participation in employment, it's only every third woman actually has time to be regularly engaged in activities that she likes. In the next presentation, we'll go deeper into the survey results, so stay tuned with us. Now let's turn to the domain of power, where we see the biggest boost for gender equality in the last 10 years. Let's look at how countries look like depending on the course of action they choose. 8 member states have so far adopted mandatory gender quotas for listed companies, and basically those 8 countries are driving progress in the European Union. Now, when they are about to reach their targets, the progress is slowing down. 10 other countries have taken a softer approach, utilizing a wide range of measures and initiatives with different degrees of stringency and specificity. The remaining 9 countries haven't taken any substantial action. So the difference is very clear. Binding and soft measures, they drive progress. But here, let's stop. And let's not overlook that the progress at the very top positions is barely moving. Women account for less than 1 in 10 board chairs or CEOs, and this hasn't changed over years. Looking at women's representation in the national parliament, we see quite a different rate of progress. In more than 10 years, women's political representation increased by 8%, while women's share on company boards actually nearly tripled. And in the last 4 years, we see that women's share in national parliament decreased in 7 countries. This is a worrying trend, especially in view of European elections next year. In line with this index theme, we conclude that we need to address gender imbalances in decision-making and gender ignorance in policies for climate action, especially in areas of energy, transport, also agriculture, areas that are most pertinent to current political agenda. As women and other disadvantaged groups are more negatively affected by climate impacts, they can provide so much needed critical leadership and solutions to address the climate crisis. Finally, I want to shed some light on the domain of work and segregation in particular, as it comes across as one of the key areas of the green transition. In the Gender Equality Index, we look at gender segregation in the care sector. Overall in the EU, you can see 4 times more women than men are employed in education, health and social welfare. This trend has remained frozen since 2010. A very similar picture emerges if you look at both extremes, men in the care sector and women in STEM. But on the other extreme, women in STEM, and you see the trend of women in STEM, it actually slightly increased by few percentage points. These 2 extremes, they represent 16 out of 20 most popular occupations in the European Union. So as labor force demand in care sector is increasing, if we look at the different age groups, the picture is not really looking so promising, because in the youngest age group, from 15 to 24, the number of men who are choosing to work in the care sector is actually very low. And when the men in the age group from 65 plus will retire soon, actually gender segregation in care sector is likely to increase. So now I would like to finish my presentation by taking a closer look at 3 steps forward campaign that EIGE ran in the last years. We received lots of proposals from you on what key 3 steps forward have to be taken to improve gender equality. This is what you think is the most important. And I hope you leave this conference with the new ideas and new commitments for the better future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jolante. And I think there are some very thought-provoking insights in this year's Gender Equality Index. And I was thinking, so one of the domain of the index is also touches upon intersecting inequalities. For instance, all those socioeconomic indicators that also are combined to gender inequalities. So, for instance, age, disability, the economic background, the ethnicity, the migration background, and even sexual orientation. What does the report this year tell us about that? Has there been an improvement?
Indeed, intersecting inequalities, it's one of the domains of index and provide probably one of the most valued perspectives to the analysis of gender equality index scores. And if I take a look at two economic domains, domain of work and money, here we can clearly see the trend that gender gaps, they start widening with the family formation, and especially with the birth of the first child. It's more or less at the age of 25 plus. And the gender gaps actually are very high in the older age group. So it's from 50 to 64. And I can give a few examples. For example, among couples with children, the full-time equivalent employment rate is highest, is 26 percentage points. So it's basically the birth of a child, it gives a so-called fatherhood premium and the motherhood penalty for the mother. And then the same trend is also quite obvious if we look at the gross earnings. The gross earnings, they're actually very high. If we look at this, starts growing in that family formation phase when women start having children. And now if we for example, look at how situation looks like among low-educated people or people with disabilities or migrant background. Generally, both women and men are quite disadvantaged in the labor market. But women actually are disadvantaged nearly 2 times more than men. So that's basically, it very clearly shows how actually gender intersects with other inequalities. As regards the earnings, I need to mention one more example. Actually, gender earnings gap is also very high among highly educated people. And for some, the fact that women are better educated in the European Union, it actually doesn't provide, in a way, an advantage, because due to very high vertical segregation in the labor market, actually women, if we look at the highly qualified people, the gender gap in earnings is very high. It means women cannot really make to the top position. And the last observation is that although overall we observe an income growth for both women and men, that's not actually the case at the lower tail of the income distribution. And there we have that many more women than men in so-called among lower earning population. And this leads actually to the increasing gender gap in poverty. And in Europe we have around 10 million women compared to 5 million of men in the age group 65 plus that are at risk of poverty. So this is also quite an important intersection of gender and age, which allows us to have a more complete picture.
That's incredibly interesting. And now I see that your presentation has also sparked some interest from our viewers. And so I would like to ask you a couple of questions. So I see one person is asking, if the index is going up by 0.6 each year, does that mean that we are at least 50 years away from achieving gender equality? And how can we get there in our lifetime? It's a good question, huh?
Indeed, and this is we can assume, right, that it will take 50 years, but we can assume this pace of change in. If situation is as we have it today. I'm not saying that situation of today is a situation that would represent the future. We are going from crisis to crisis, and we don't know where the situation will take us. Because every time we experience a shock in the society, and we were going through these shocks, they increasingly increase, put this all gender equality gains and achievements at risk. So we had the economic and financial crisis, then we had the health crisis, now we have security crisis and climate crisis. So basically, to say 50 years, it's in a way would probably be an optimistic scenario. I don't want to be very positive, but I think it's a sign that we need to be proactive and take a bit of a stronger actions
Yeah.
and to be a bit more strategic if we want to reach it sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit disheartening that 50 years is the optimistic scenario, but yeah, your point on the crisis is absolutely on point. So I also have another question, which is, it's a bit more technical. It's how do you apply an intersectional approach to data? Do you, and also, it's also part of the same question. The person is asking, what about gender equality for women who belong to minorities or have a disability? Is the overlap with other diversity points taken into account? Well, I guess we partially already responded to this. I don't know if you want to add something more.
We just we try to apply intersectional perspective in a cross-sectional way, cross-cutting way. So basically, in every analysis of every domain, it has also entails an intersectional analysis. We are trying to do our best and looking at the best quality data that we can use in our analysis, and we are fully aware that there are very major data limitations. And if we can see more about, for example, about situation of people of different age groups, if we can see more about the situation of people having different education, and about people with disabilities or without disabilities, so maybe we can see less, for example, about certain ethnic groups. But we are trying really to make the best use also of qualitative research and sometimes data, even if it's available for just a few member states. And for the future, we'll try to even step up our effort more in order to be a bit more reflective, really, on a situation of as diverse groups as possible.
Yeah. And maybe just because we don't have a lot of time, we just have 3 minutes left, but I really want to reply maybe this other question. Somebody is saying we are missing an indicator for infrastructure, and he is such as gender provision, alignment, accessibility of public spaces and infrastructure. Yeah, so do you agree with that? Do you want to work on an indicator for infrastructure?
Indexes as a whole is looking just at indicators at individual level, how situation looks like for women and men. But the so-called outcome indicators, okay, because they are most interested really how investments or how certain policies, what impact they make on the life of women and men. But of course, infrastructure, also policies or attitudes of people, these are very important contextual indicators, so-called input indicators that we take very seriously in our analysis. For example, I can give an example in the domain of time, and when we speak about unpaid care, it would be impossible to speak about it without looking at availability of services or accessibility of services. And because there is very strong statistical evidence, it has a direct link on the distribution of unpaid care. So indeed, as it was mentioned, is that yes, public infrastructure or access to services, access to transport, access to certain resources, and these are very important explanatory factors that have to be taken into account.
Yeah, and yeah. So I believe that one viewer has asked us what STEM stands for, and yeah, maybe you can give
it. It's an abbreviation of science, technology, engineering, and math, and usually use it to speak of those sectors that up to date still remain male dominated. So these are the occupations where we would like to see more women. And when we speak, of course, about green transition is a topic also of today's discussion. It's very important to have also more women there, because segregation generally it's a quite big structural issues that is linked with many other inequalities in society.
Yeah, and I saw that there were some achievements there in the number of women involved in STEM as well in this year's index. I believe our time is up, unfortunately, but Jolanta, thank you very much. It was absolutely an insightful presentation. And now, so we will move to our next session, but before we will have a very short break. Welcome back. I have the pleasure to introduce to the studio Marusha Gornar. She's another EIGE expert. She's the head of research and policy support unit at EIGE as well, and she will present us the findings of a survey on unpaid care. As I mentioned before in my introduction, this is a very important topic and one on which we sometimes lack the data. And this year, for the first time after 7 years, so EIGE could update the time domain. So I'm very happy to have you here, Marusha, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Frederica, and welcome to this session. The title of my session is Time for a Change. So I will speak about the importance of care and what kind of change or changes we need to create a more gender equal society where women and men can prosper in all their diversity and throughout their lives. And as we know, care is a fundamental aspect of our lives. Throughout the life, we will either provide care or we will require care. So And as we know from the data and experience, the care is also highly gendered, as women still take the biggest share of care responsibility in the families. However, as it was already mentioned before by Jolanta in her presentation, men are starting to be more involved in care. At least they show higher willingness to be engaged. And that also means that they do face certain challenges when it comes to work-life balance. And as Frederica said, we will here today look into some of the key findings from our EIGE's unique survey on care inequalities, on gender inequalities in care. And more specifically, we will look on the socioeconomic costs of care, what kind of role formal care services play, and also we will look into impact on gender equality at large. Care has socioeconomic costs, but also has the opportunities. Unfortunately, these costs are more felt by women, especially if we look more closely into employment, working time of those who provide care, as well as work-life balance tensions. First, let's look at the employment and working time of carers. Unequal sharing of care responsibilities between women and men is a significant contributor to gender equalities in the labor market. Having to spend more time on care responsibilities, it limits professional and career advancement, economic independence, as well as it impacts work-life balance. For example, when we look at the childcare, less women than men tend to be employed, and also they more often work part-time, especially when it comes to long-term care. These implications to career and financial prospects, financial independence are even bigger. And it's also a fact that those women caring for children are more likely to be stay-at-home parents, and they take this as their main occupation. They see that this is very intensive work. We have 11% of women and only 1% of men who are full-time stay-at-home parents. And when it comes to long-term care, we see that part-time rates among both women and men are higher, and this also means that this type of care is intensive and requires time. I said that intensive care does influence also our work-life balance opportunities, as it requires significant time, physical and also emotional efforts, and that does impact our opportunities in the professional life. And as we can see from the graph, more than a third of women and men with children under the age of 12 do experience difficulties when they combine paid work with childcare responsibilities. And this data is even higher for lone parents, as nearly 4 out of 10 lone parents experience such tensions. And when we speak about long-term care, the difficulties are even bigger. And this also hints towards very high demand of such care, and also issues in accessing formal long-term care services, and we come back to that a little bit later. Let's just look quickly what kind of impact the childcare and long-term care has on professional life of women and men. We see that more women than men, especially mothers with young children, had to reduce their working time due to care, and also had less time for career and studies. And this confirms a persisting trend, also gender norms, societal expectations, that it is generally mothers who are under heavier pressure to adjust their working lives to care demands. And of course, this has a negative, detrimental effect to their job prospects. What can we do to lift the care load? So, first thing is accessibility of services. This is a key. Then formal care services do alleviate the burden of informal care. They facilitate a healthier work-life balance for working women and men. And they also provide professional assistance and care. And high quality and affordable long-term care, formal long-term care, is also important since it empowers older people by helping them to maintain their autonomy and also live in dignity. So that's a very key element as well. And according to our data, 6 out of 10 parents with smaller children under the age of 6, do use childcare services, and they most commonly use it up to 3 to 5 hours per day. With the provision, we see with this data that with the provision of services, the intensity of care reduces. And same goes also for long-term care services. So 6 out of 10 long-term carers do use care services, formal care services as well. And there is a difference between men using this kind of services between women and men. Men tend to use such services a bit more often than women, and on average that can be connected to their better financial situation as well as prevailing gender norms. Let's look at some data. This slide illustrates the relation between use of formal care services and the intensity of informal care. So when we look at the child care services, effect is particularly strong for mothers of children below 6 years. And amongst those who do not use the child care services, nearly half of them is caring for more than 10 hours a day. And notably, the share of fathers who provide such intensive care is much smaller, as we can see from the data. And similar trend goes also for long-term care. So, but here the effect is equally strong for women and men. Just very quickly to confirm this data, let's look at the country level. We see a very clear picture that in those countries where more parents use formal childcare services, they are less intensively engaged in these care services, in providing care. And the same trend is visible for long-term care services, where the long-term services are used and available, the intensity of informal care is lower. When we talk about provision of formal care, we also see that there are certain unmet needs for such care. Despite the clear benefits of formal care provision, our data shows that significant share of women and men and also care recipients struggle to access all the formal care services they need. For a quarter of carers, for the long-term care services are not accessible. That is quite a striking number. And what are the main reasons for these unmet needs? Both parents and those who need long-term care, they name affordability, long waiting lists, unavailability of required services as main reasons. So long waiting lists are the main reason when it comes to childcare services, and affordability is the main barrier when it comes to long-term carers. And here we also need to look at a little bit at the urban-rural divide. Carers residing in sparsely populated areas in rural or remote regions, they have even bigger difficulties in accessing affordable services. This sector is generally facing increasing demands, but it's relatively underdeveloped in many countries. And here we see that the main reason are patchy and limited social protection coverages for the long-term services in different member states. And let's talk about benefits. From the previous slides, we saw that the formal care services might help to alleviate the care load. And we have done at EIGE an analysis, so-called probability modeling, which shows the relation between the use of services and the possible benefits for gender equality at large. So our analysis shows that investments in formal care services increase probability of gender equality overall, and more specifically in two domains, in the domain of work and in the domain of money. So those countries with higher use of formal care services have also higher probabilities to have high scores in these domains and also in the overall gender equality index. So the likely effect behind that is quite straightforward. We can make a connection. Reduced care obligations or care load leads to higher participation of women in employment, results in their higher incomes, and this has positive impact for gender equality as also measured by Gender Equality Index. And to conclude, which can be the 3 steps forward at the European as well as national levels? So we know investing and funding for formal care. Let's strengthen it, earmark and increase. This will improve quality, accessibility and affordability of care services. Data is very important. Let's collect EU-wide gender statistics on different types of care, work-life balance, access to formal care services, and set ambitious targets when it comes to services. And apply targeted measures to challenge traditional gender roles. Let's actively promote equal sharing of caring responsibilities between women and men, equal engagement in paid work, and for both women and men, and contributing equally to society. And we do have a legislative and policy framework for all that in place. We have objectives of work-life balance directive, of the European care strategy. So let's make sure that all these objectives are integrated into relevant policy initiatives and also frameworks, both at the EU and the national levels, and that we set the budget aside for these important investments in long-term care. And of course, monitoring, evaluation of this progress is of the utmost importance. And let me just finish with a quote of this year's Nobel Prize winner and a professor of economics, Claudia Golding. We are never going to have gender equality until we also have couple equity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marusha. It was extremely interesting to hear about things that are so close to us. I mean, but you said that one of the key solutions to alleviate the burden on informal carers is to strengthen the formal care sector. But now, we have experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, we know that their conditions are not exactly excellent. So what does the report say about the formal care sector and their gender inequalities, and what can we do to help them as well?
In this particular survey, which I was presenting today, we did not look into employment conditions of carers in formal care sector, but it comes from the evidence of other studies. And as you have mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the situation and also conditions in which the formal care providers work, and they have to work. And we can't talk about care sector without or caring without also looking into indeed working conditions and situation of carers. We know that care sector is highly female dominated. It is 3/4 of employed are women in this sector. And especially when we look at, let's say, less qualified professions or personal care workers, there the share of women is even higher, so it comes to even 95%. And we also know that part of the care sector goes unregistered. It's in this kind of gray zone. So in such conditions where also the work itself or the sector is not valued, we know that workers, especially women, are then facing low wages, low recognition of such work, also harassment cases, heavy workloads, stress connected with the work, and high tensions when it comes to also mental health. So that's important. That's why it's important that this sector gets additional funding. It is recognized as part of our economies, and it may then also attract more young men into these occupations. We heard before, I think Jolanta was also mentioning that this sector is not attractive for young men as an employment opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And maybe very briefly, as I believe we don't have so much time, but maybe if you could tell us very briefly, why is it so important to talk about the energy transition in care? Like, where are the linkages there?
We know that with climate changes and also with demographic changes, with our aging societies, there will be higher and higher demand for different care services, be it when it comes to child care, care for elderly people, people with disabilities, if we are to invest into care sector more, this sector also needs to respond to environmental challenges and environmental changes. So that's important. That's why it's important that investment, usually it's public or private-public investment in this sector, is also green when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to how they operate, how the facilities are let's say, contributed to carbon neutrality and so on. This is one element where the linkages are. When we look at the unpaid care or care provided, informal care provided in household, there we also see a bit different patterns when it comes to green-friendly behaviors. Women are slightly more likely to be sensitive to sustainable practices and apply sustainable practices in care and in household activities. They are slightly more prone to recycle and be go for more eco-friendly products when it comes to food or cleaning, and men tend to resist slightly more likely this kind of practices. It can be also connected very much with gender stereotypes, that these kind of behaviors are seen as less manly as maybe society is expecting from them.
Okay.
So
The famous eco-gender gap. Okay.
exactly.
Thank you so much, Marusha. And now we have a break of several minutes, and we will come back with our panel discussions. And welcome back to the Gender Equality Index 2023 conference. After having heard the findings of the Gender Equality Index this year and also the results of the survey on the time domain, I believe we have a good basis now for a discussion. I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by Irene Montero. She is the Spanish Minister for Equality. Hi, Irene. Happy to have you here.
Thank you.
At my left, I have Carmen Niethammer. She's a senior gender specialist at the EIB, the European Investment Bank. Hi, Carmen.
Hello, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And I have also Robert Biedron on time, even though he just came from the FEM committee. Yes. He's obviously the chair of the FEM committee here at the European Parliament. Hi, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Federica. Thank you for this opportunity.
Great to have you here. And also, unfortunately not here, but very much with us in the spirit is also Anke Stock. She is the senior gender expert at the Women in Europe for a Common Future NGO. Hi, Anke. Great to have you with us. Okay. I think we now have 45 minutes, roughly. It's going to be a very interesting discussion, and I would like to start immediately with you, Irene. So, as Spanish Minister for Equality, you have led the adoption of a number of trailblazing legislation. You have increased the abortion and transgender rights, especially for teenagers. You have also reversed the burden of proof in the case of rape. And last but not least, you also made sure that women in Spain are now granted a paid menstrual leave, which is basically which made of Spain the first country to do so. Now we have just heard the findings of the Gender Equality Index, and I wonder, where do you see the nexus between energy and climate and also gender equality? What do you think are the risks, but also the opportunities that we can harness?
Thank you very much for your question. It is an honor to share this roundtable with you. I believe everyone in Europe have a different way of organizing the economy, and we are going through a deep crisis, a civilization crisis. And there are two strategic transitions, the green transition, or the climate crisis, and the feminist transition, because the rights of more than half of the population, the rights of women and the LGBT community rights. And these are essential crises. That's why there is a big link, a very big link. We won't solve one without the other. And we need to manage them in a coordinated manner because they are interrelated. There aren't many studies discussing this link. There should be more data, and the data we have tend to focus on the global south because we can see the evidence of this link more clearly. But the UN report in 2022 says women see the effects of climate change differently. They suffer more the consequences of climate change. Greenpeace said climate change increases the gender gap. This happens in Spain, but I think it happens everywhere in Europe. Women suffer the impacts on their health and their life conditions. They have to face the crisis. They are hardest hit by the crisis, and this makes it difficult for them to access other rights. This increases the income gap, job insecurity, prices increase, prices of basic products increase, and this affects women. There's more problems regarding access to education, health, and the energy poverty is very widespread in our societies, and it affects women as well. There is a report of the Women's Institute in Spain that says that women, boys and girls are 14 times more likely to die if there are disasters, natural disasters, in those countries with gender inequality. So we see both crises are closely related, and 80% of climate refugees are women. Climate change risks increase when we think about vulnerable women. Older women, women in rural area, LGBT women, women in armed conflicts, women of African descent. And we need to know that climate crises are forcing women to migrate. Many have to leave, but those women that stay are the ones looking after the resources, the land, and this affects their access to other rights such as education, employment, health, and gender violence increases as well in cases of conflict and climate insecurity. These assaults increase, and many of the perpetrators are immune. And the infrastructures are destroyed when certain climate disasters take place. And we need to look at the Istanbul Convention, because we need to protect women from all types of violence. And I would like to mention political violence as well. There are women that suffer this type of violence when they're leaders and fight against climate change. And I would also like to say that we could turn the situation around, and women can be actors of change. So the data available show that when women participate in decision-making, we make more sustainable decisions, we increase access to education, we promote sustainability, and the EIGE Institute is working a lot in this regard. We are reinforcing public transport, for instance, so it's safer to walk. And from the institutions, we must promote this movement, especially movement of young women that are fighting the climate emergency, and we should allow them to participate in power spaces, the media, social spaces, political spaces, because that will be key to move forward in terms of feminist policies and policies to fight the climate emergency.
Thank you for pointing the finger to so many important issues, and to also for giving us the figures of how much women tend to be impacted by climate change, especially by climate disasters, and also in those dramatic events that we see popping up right now even more often. But you mentioned at the end of your discussion the need for a feminist policy, and that's exactly what I want to ask to Anke Stock, because Anke, in your recent research, you have written about the need for a more feminist policy, especially in the case of the Green Deal. Because as we mentioned before today, the EU institutions have ratified like an enormous, a huge series of climate legislation. But I believe that you underlined the need for a more, a better focus on the gender dimension in those policies. Could you tell us more? Why do we need to incorporate the gender lens in the Green Deal policies?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. That's an important issue, and I'm very grateful for that raising of those various gender gaps that we are having. And unfortunately, it's the European Green Deal that also is very gender blind, even though we have at the same time a union of equality, which has a gender strategy that should really pertain all the different policies and legislation that we have. I would like to give a particular example from a recent project that we have just finalized. It's a project called Empower Meet, which is focusing on energy poverty in 6 countries around coastal areas of the Mediterranean. And it was aiming really at alleviating energy poverty and improving the health of people affected by energy poverty, focusing in particular on women. And we know that women and women-led households are very much affected by energy poverty, mainly due to the fact that women tend to spend more time working at home, as we've just also seen by the interesting presentation of the EIGE study on care work, and they are so more exposed to energy poverty and its consequences. So what Women Engage for Common Future, together with its partners from the respective countries, tried to do was really implementing practical solutions tailored to the needs and tailored to really empower also those 4,200 households we are working with. Then we were promoting policy solutions for tackling energy poverty on national and local level, but also at EU level. And then we were assessing the efficiency and the impacts of those various practices on energy poverty alleviation, and formulated specific policy recommendations. And maybe I go more into those because they really affected parts of the European Green Deal framework, in particular related obviously to energy, the Renewable Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, and also the renovation wave. And we realized what is so crucial still, we've been speaking so long about that, are disaggregated, gender disaggregated data. Yeah? Energy poverty is caused housing, fuel dependency, the crisis here, and systemic and structural inequalities, including gender inequalities. And we need to understand the intersection of gender and energy poverty much more in order to really what we could do. And what we also need is a regular data collection there. Then it's to have gender transformative policy design and implementation. Need to consider the different needs of the different genders. What we have advocated for a long time is really gender inclusivity in those various advisory boards to EU bodies and so on. The recast of the EED directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, now really took that into account, at least in those networks that they are establishing. They are suggesting to have also gender experts present there. So that's a start, but it's way from being sufficient. And key is obviously also targeted financing. We still have, for example, the split incentive barrier, where we have in many member states that the person who is really investing in an energy efficient building is not beneficiary from the outcomes. So that is the landlord and tenant normally. So we need here policies that address these. We need to use those tools that we have gender budgeting, we need gender indicators for those frameworks and finance programs, and that is obviously also key.
Thank you, Anke. And you just mentioned, sorry, I'm taking this out. You just mentioned the need for more funding, and here we have an expert of the financial sector. Carmen, you work for the EIB, so the EIB is also behind the financing scheme of the Just Transition Mechanism, which is an essential part of the Green Deal toolbox, in the sense that is this type of funding that is tasked with making sure that nobody is left behind. So you also have a long career as a gender specialist, and you advise also the EIB in this case on how to incorporate the gender lens. What do you think is the link between this gender-sensitive finance and the green transition? Where can we identify this link, and also what can policymakers do to make sure they leverage the funding instruments they have to also accelerate the gender cause?
No, thank you, Federica, for the opportunity to be here. And first of all, huge congratulations to the EIGE team on their 2023 Gender Index. It's a humongous amount of research, and I think if we take this data that they produce for inside the EU, the minister mentioned we really need this data, it can really be a game changer in terms of meeting gender equality goals, but also climate action goals. Federica, maybe before answering your question, for those that are following us online, maybe a quick introduction on what EIB is all about. The European Investment Bank actually is the lending arm of the European Union. We are the largest multilateral lender and also the biggest provider of climate finance. And I think that's really key to this conversation today, because with that comes a huge amount of responsibility. And one of my jobs is to make sure that the climate finance that we facilitate is also inclusive. And here we are guided by the Climate Bank roadmap that we at EIB follow, where gender is integrated at its core. And maybe a reminder as to why this gender and climate link is so incredibly important. Because indeed, there's a huge climate investment opportunity, right? So globally, that climate investment opportunity was estimated to have a value of $23 trillion. And when we integrate a gender lens into those climate investments, we know that these returns can actually be massified, maximized. And so working and investing in both public and private sector investments, we do know that there is a business case, and that gender equality goes way beyond gender equality being a core value of the European Union. The private sector in particularly will be key in meeting climate goals, and that's also why the climate agenda needs to be able to formulate the business case. And here we are guided also by our 2X taxonomy that we apply, and I can talk about it more. Women's entrepreneurship, the minister mentioned earlier, inside the European Union, it's only half of that compared to the United States and the UK. And that is despite the fact that we actually know that women entrepreneurs are much more likely to start sustainable businesses than men. But they're starting the businesses, so they're actually also in need of sustained finance throughout the entrepreneurship cycle. And so this is also where we come in to ensure that women entrepreneurs can be sufficiently financed to scale up the solutions that actually are going to make the difference in terms of meeting climate goals. And more than that, climate leadership in the financial sector plays a key role. We actually do know that the representation of women in the banking industry is lagging behind, but the European Central Bank did a study which I thought was quite important for us to also bring to the forefront here, is that when you have a bank that has high gender diversity at the top, these banks are less likely to lend to polluters. So here is really a critical element for supporting women as climate leaders, really, not only because they bring a new perspective, new solutions to climate investments and business mechanisms that one can actually think of, but they're also found to be more resilient since they have made it through the glass ceiling, and they don't seem to be shy in order to be disruptive. And maybe one more point in terms of the data point in terms of why we should really care about investing in women-led firms. We recently did a study on women's entrepreneurship inside the European Union, again to the point of why this data is so important, because we really don't have much, but the chief economist at the European Investment Bank, who happens to also be a woman, undertook that research with her team, and it turns out that just like in the EIGE Index for this year, that it's not only that firms that are led by women happen to be better when it comes to ESG transparency, when it comes to meeting better goals in terms of energy efficiency, water efficiency, recycling. What is also key, and I think this is also important for our green transition, and also when it comes to green jobs, is that when companies are led by women, they are also more likely to invest in human capital. That is human capital in both women and men. And women-led firms are more likely to attract and retain women in the workforce. So when we are talking about women making it to green jobs, women playing a critical role in making the European Union a more competitive space, then we might have found a silver bullet by investing in companies that have higher gender diversity, so that we're meeting both gender equality and climate action goals. But how do we do this in practice in terms of climate finance at the European Investment Bank? We really have 5 entry points. And as I mentioned before, the most important to us, or the most visible and easiest to probably do, is just focusing on promoting women entrepreneurs and promoting women as fund managers, because they also have a lot of impact on how sub-financing happens with a gender lens. Then we strengthen the resilience and adaptive capacity of women and girls, and we really look also at the whole agenda, obviously, of green jobs and leadership opportunities. We tackle gender and social inequalities with climate solutions. And here then lastly comes the point that I feel very, very strongly about, because it's all about enhancing women's access to and benefits from low carbon intensive infrastructure services, because I'm a true believer that when it comes to urban development services, when it comes to mobility services, that actually is a facilitator of getting women into jobs, in making sure that women can take these leadership positions, in women accessing the necessary care and health services. And here I'm very proud that we are joined by Her Excellency from Spain, because we have quite a few infrastructure service projects in Spain, including with the Barcelona Metro Authority, that is metro and bus services, where we make sure that these services are secure and safe, including for the LGBTIQ community, which is also a vulnerable group that you talked about. And what is incredible about this project, and it comes back to the business case and also the role that these new tools really for investors also bring. We are calculating both the economic benefit and the business benefit for the operator in terms of attracting women customers to use their services more. We have a social housing project in Valencia. We have a project in Andalusia in terms of transport services that we can talk more in the Q&A. But finally, I just wanted to mention a very important tool for investors. We cannot deliver on climate action and gender by ourselves. We are partnering with members from the 2X community, 2X being a taxonomy on gender criteria that again helps target, track progress and measure impact in a very useful way along the finance spectrum. At COP26, we produced, together with others, a very useful 2x Gender Smart Climate Finance Guide. It looks at 4 thematic areas: green jobs, mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity. It tackles 7 different sectors, including the ones that I just mentioned: urban development, smart cities, mobility, energy, etc. And I just invite you to maybe visit it and learn on how you can reach both climate finance and gender lens finance goals together, because together they make a difference. I stop here because I'm sure we have more questions to
Thank you, Carmen. It was very exhaustive. But now you raised quite a lot of points, so you can let Robert maybe expand on those and tell us. So we see how much the EIB is working on, but I'm very curious to hear how the FEM committee in particular is trying to mainstream gender equality. It mustn't be an easy task, you know. So what are the main fields you're working on? I would be very grateful to have this bird's-eye overview of what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Federica. And I think this is one of the examples how we can mainstream women first, because there are always men who want to speak and not to listen. So this order fits me very well, and thank you for doing that. I think if I was to give the practical examples, this Gender Equality Week we are just celebrating here in the European Parliament, you can see how busy it is. Also because of our activities, is one of the ways how we can engage people, connect people, and also invite men into this discussion. The problem is that it's very often that when we talk about gender mainstreaming, gender issues, those are female leaders, experts, politicians talking about that. We need men on the board. We need men to understand that this is a common issue, that this is not only a female leaders who will solve the issue of, for example, female underrepresentation in politics, but also men must be on board. And of course, we were discussing it today at the committee meeting about female leadership, that men are fear of losing the power. It's a natural fear people have. We as men, we have a power, and we are afraid to lose it. The way, the question is how to find the key that men will understand that it's not about losing the power. It's about sharing our responsibilities equally, that we understand that this is we will have common benefits on that. And here in European Parliament, of course, we have a long history of combating all of these inequalities. The gender mainstreaming policy was introduced already in 2008. We have a female president of the parliament, and we're having all these gender mainstreaming policies. But the reality is, then in the committees where there is money and power, you have men. Like in AFCO committee, which deals with constitutional affairs. So then they decide about the changes in the treaties, the changes in the rules of procedures. There are only 14% of women. And when it's about my committee, women's rights and gender equality, there is only 5% of men. So you see clearly this, where it's to decide about money and power, you have men. When it's to decide about difficult, complicated issues where there is lack of money and lack of power, you have women. We need to change it. The clever way we, of course, trying to introduce is to, through events like this, to connect committees, to show the different perspectives, and of course, showing the men the benefits of this change. We do it also through gender mainstreaming network, which we established, and where representatives of each committee must be present and must take part of this network, and to somehow report as well on the progress they made to secure the fair representation of men and women. We do it also through our rapporteurs. We have 2 standing rapporteurs on gender mainstreaming who are doing their effort to secure that in every level of European Parliament we have gender policies implemented. But it's a difficult task. We still did not reach in this House full equal representation of men and women. 40% is a great achievement. Many parliaments don't have it in our respective countries. But if you look at the way back in 1979, when there were first European elections, there were only, if I remember well, 17% of women elected to this House. So the change is coming. Too slow, I agree. As EIGE is showing, we need 60 years to achieve full equality between men and women in European Union. People will land sooner on Mars. It's expected that we will reach full gender equality in European Union. We need 300 years to reach gender equality globally. This is a shame. None of us will witness it, whether it's European Union or globally. None of us, none of these people will witness full gender equality. This is a shame. We need to speed up, and through these reports like EIGE is doing, Gender Index, showing the data, showing inequalities, through these events like Gender Equality Week, through experts like you, through ministers, brave ministers like you, Minister, we can achieve it. This is a common goal, including boys and men. I think we, as men, should also take over the responsibility of this change.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Robert. And on these very encouraging notes, I think I can ask you, so now we are in the last months of the Spanish presidency at the Council of the European Union. So we've just heard that we need 60 years to reach gender equality in the EU. Probably it's not going to be the Spanish presidency that will help us reach the goal in the next until December. And yet, I think that Spain has tried its best, really, to help Europe move forward towards this green and gender equal Europe that we want. Can you tell us a little bit, what do you want the legacy of the Spanish presidency to be when it comes to green transition and gender equality?
I am going to do that, but I would like to say something regarding the previous intervention from the FEMS committee president. You can do a lot of things in a few months, but we're discussing very deep transformations. Both gender equality and the climate crisis show that we are having trouble organizing our financial systems. When women acquire power, men have to understand or accept that we're losing some privilege and we cannot have all of the power. And if we link the climate crisis and gender inequality, we can see clearly that we need to reorganize the way we are managing our life, our economy, our politics, because it should be fairer for everyone. But this is a very deep transformation. We have enemies as well, powerful enemies, and we cannot do this overnight. But there is a very important element of this link between the climate emergency and gender inequality. We see that we cannot keep having the same system and distribute it differently. The system no longer works. We need to transform our system deeply. We need to live differently. All of us need to live differently. Otherwise, we will not be able to solve such deep crises. And therefore, the transformation agenda to fight the climate emergency and end inequality between men and women, it is the only possible democratic agenda. It's the peace agenda, the democratic agenda. During the Spanish presidency, we have some ambitious goals. We want to move towards the green transition. This has been a priority for our government as well in Spain. We want to reform the electric market in Europe, reduce power prices, handle all of the different files of a Fit for 55, and we want to promote a better financial and social justice. It's one of our big goals. We want to have a powerful agenda to promote the guarantee of a right to care, to receive care. We want to be able to make progress and have a common gender violence policy in Europe. We want to keep fighting for LGBTI rights, and we want to fight racism as well. As other panelists have said, we need to have data. We don't have enough data in the European statistics data system. And I believe data is very important as well, because if we don't consider these goals as part of the transformation, then they should see all these aspects as financial development components as well. If we're thinking about informal care, it represents 9% of the global GDP. There aren't many strategic components that represent such an amount globally, and it is very important to have stronger international bonds. We need to have stronger institutions that promote good practices, such as the EIGE Institute. We need to have different strategies as part of the Green Deal, for example, and as the FEM committee chair has said, I believe we can work on certain specific policies. During the Spanish presidency, I believe we're being quite ambitious with the green agenda, but we need to have a firm commitment. This way of organizing our economies, our lives, is no longer enough. We need a different way to organize ourselves. We need sustainability, and this is something we share when we think about the climate crisis and the rights of women and LGBT people. All lives should be the same. We should all have the same rights, and we need to remember that public services are essential, and one of the main features of Europe should be considering public services such essential elements. And thank you so much. I would like to say thank you to EIGE. We say EIGE in Spanish. I believe that doesn't sound very nice. But thank you to the Institute for the work you're carrying out. This helps our countries have data, and it helps us fight for the feminist cause and fight the climate emergency. Your work is essential.
Thank you so much, Minister. And here as well, I mean, the Minister just stressed the importance of a systemic change, basically. It's not enough to just make small tweaks. We just need to look at things differently. And so that makes me think that another paradigm shift that is needed, and now I'm looking both at Anke and also at Carmen, but maybe I can start with you, Anke, is the one that we use when we think about green skills. Especially now, the EU is becoming very acutely aware of the green skills shortage. So we realize that if we want to achieve our climate targets and this very aspirational 45%, for instance, of energy that should come from renewables by 2030, then there is no way we can achieve this without tripling, basically, the amount of green workers. But of course, those need to come as well from women. which is not the case at the moment. So, I mean, this is one of the issues here. But another issue is that as we progress in, as climate change unfolds and it becomes a bigger burden for everybody, even in Europe, then I wonder whether we should think about green skills in a different way. So not just thinking about installers, but also thinking about the care workers, because in a way, the green skills we refer to now are the green jobs in the mitigation, so to say, but we also need to think in terms of adaptation. And also in your recent publication, you mentioned the need to revalorize the care workers. Can you tell us why it is so important, and what are the concrete steps that policymakers could take to achieve this task? There was a long introduction, sorry.
No, fine. Thank you, Federica. I very much agree with the analysis of Irene Montero. Thank you. I really think we need to look at our system differently, and we need to manage differently. And I think at the State of Union speech of Ursula von der Leyen in September, she really also said that we need to understand the centrality of the care economy and the work, the unpaid care work that is done. We have learned those lessons, or we should have learned the lessons from COVID-19, and we need to see that importance. From our research work, I think we definitely would recommend to replace GDP as an overall indicator, for example, an indicator for prosperity, and we need to introduce better methods for measuring well-being, for example. And looking at one of the key mechanisms of the European Green Deal, the Just Transition mechanism, which is the tool really to ensure the transformation towards carbon neutral economy, and doing that in a fair and sustainable and social way. This Just Transition mechanism is also gender blind and does not reflect at all on gender inequalities. It mainly really provides finances to reskilling workers in the brown industries, and supports the creation of green jobs, as you just mentioned, Federica, and that will reinforce, if it's done in the way as it has been done before and in the same system, it will reinforce existing gender segregation and existing gender inequalities that are existing in these sectors currently. So what we really want is the care system also to be a beneficiary of this mechanism, and it has to be taken into account. Concretely, that probably means that we would need binding targets on the share of women in male-dominated environmental sectors. For example, the renewable energy. We need public funding for measures aiming at gender balance in the workforce. We need training, specifically targeted recruitment and other issues. And we have really good examples there. So that is all out there. We just need to implement it widely. And maybe we need also to think about penalties for non-compliance. Then we also collectively agreed decent working conditions for care workers. We need reinforcing social rights for care workers. We need public investment in care infrastructure, in other feminized and low carbon sectors. So these are all measures that we know about. We have examples that are existing, but we are not taking that wholeheartedly and integrated into a mainstream methodology here. And I think that's something we need to work on with the European care strategy, with the development of that strategy, for example. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Anke. And I would like to follow up on this with you, Carmen. So in your career, you have also been advising institutions on how to incorporate the gender perspective. Do you agree with Anke's stance that it is very important to underline this care dimension? Where do you think the main basically, how can we also incorporate this care dimension and not just focusing on gender as a narrow option, but also thinking about care and well-being in broader terms?
Yeah, I think what Anke pointed out very correctly is that the care economy is very complicated because we're talking about elder care, we're talking about care for the disabled or the differently abled, we are talking about child care, and all of these care services are, of course, much more performed by women still today. And so the care burden, the responsibility lying on mostly women's shoulders also keeps them from seeking formal employment at the same time, and makes it more difficult to also contribute to these climate action solutions that we were talking about earlier, be it as entrepreneurs or be it as climate leaders. I think what gives me hope and optimism in tackling these complicated and very complex care challenges is that it's not only the challenges that need to be pointed out here, but there's also opportunities. And I think the private sector, particularly employers, have been able to realize that actually providing access to care service to their employees has also a business case. The employers that do this best attract and retain the best workforce, including, by the way, also men. I was very thrilled to see in my career that that men are becoming jealous when childcare services are just being offered to single women, and they want to be part of it, and they're giving up other employment opportunities because that particular employer actually provides them with the benefits, the man benefits to access to childcare and other parental benefits that the employer may offer. Just to say maybe a word that we also have to think about this whole care economy differently, and I think infrastructure services are incredibly important here as well. One of the most successful projects I have seen is in a town where there was a hospital that actually has female and male doctors and nurses, and they were ready to move to another city because they couldn't find childcare services. So they partnered with the community and then shared childcare services that they need 24/7 because medical services are 24/7. And so here all of a sudden you have better attraction and retention of very qualified healthcare workers in the city that didn't have that before. So everybody benefits. And on top of that, they were able to offer these childcare services at the hospital also to those visiting their patients. So it was a win-win-win situation for the city. So one can also think about these differently by just building the right infrastructure and putting the right infrastructure in place. The other thing that we also do with much more systemic approach at the European Investment Bank is when we finance educational facilities like universities, like other vocational schools, we also put in place childcare facilities from the beginning in the infrastructure of the campus, so that also attracts and retains female students or parents at these educational establishments. And that will also be, again, very important for the green transition. When we are reskilling people, parents need to have access to childcare facility. And last but not least, again, it's the transport piece, right? The transport sector is also a sector that runs 24/7. How are we supposed to attract and retain particularly women or parents into that sector that is in need of skills and talents when we don't provide them with access to childcare services or any kind of services? And the transport system can again play a very, very key role in getting people from and to care services so that the rest of the economic activities are facilitated. Maybe I'd like to invite our audience to just also visit a project that we completed last week. This is in Bologna, Italy, where we work with the municipality of Bologna to make urban development infrastructure services more accessible to all. We produced a manual, we produced an atlas. I invite people to visit it so that they can actually learn how we can make urban development services, including also on education, a game changer. So thank you very much. I think I stop there.
Thank you, Carmen. Super interesting. Robert. Yes.
Federica.
Yes. For you, I don't want to get too political. Also, we don't have a lot of time, but it's a fact that we also discussed it before. You probably you were at the FM committee, so you didn't hear us. But as soon as there is a crisis, also the women's rights tend to go back, to step back. So it's basically. That's also, I guess, Director explained the reason why they created this steps forward campaign, because normally it's just 2 steps forward and 1 back. So, I mean, now we have this alarming situation with the far right surging to power. As I said, I don't want to become too political, but what do you think could be? What do you think we could do to prevent, to make sure that the achievements that women and men in all their, all women and men have got so far, and make sure that we don't go back, basically?
The answer is clear, and it was answered by the participants. We should create a union of equality, which is not the case, because it's when it's free and women still don't have equal rights. And we need to, of course, push back against this pushback. This should be seriously treated. That we're speaking about real lives and real issues, that women are being not paid fairly, don't have equal access to, for example, Carmen has mentioned transportation in Poland. In my own country, there are 14 million people excluded from the public transportation. And who pays the highest price? Of course, mainly older women, who cannot access this transportation, who do not have driving license, who do not have access to the car, so they paying always the highest price. So we should be ambitious. With all this said, we should. Anke Stock has talked about the measures we should implement. Yes, we should start implementing the measures we agreed and we are working on. And we should treat this seriously. You know, we live in the reality where many women in this continent don't have equal rights. We live in the situation when in the European Union we have standardized driving license plates. We'll have one common charger, the phone charger. We have one common roaming system, but we do not have one common standard on women's rights. This is the situation which is creating an absurd, and we should be strong enough, brave enough, determined enough to change this situation. And I assure you, our committee is doing a lot of effort to create a reality with every girl, every woman, especially in this multi-crisis situation in Europe and around the world, is protected and will have equal rights.
Thank you so much, Robert. And unfortunately, we run a bit late, so Minister Irene Montero had to leave earlier. I want to thank a lot our panelists. So thank you so much, Carmen Niethammer and Anke Stock. And so thank you so much again. And now, before starting the last, the closing remarks, I invite you to watch a short video which hopefully will give you some climate inspiration. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Alice Kuhnke and I'm a Green member of the European Parliament. These are the three most important steps forward for a green and gender equal Europe. First of all, we need to make sure that Commission President Ursula von der Leyen needs to deliver on what she promised, a Green Deal that leaves no one behind. The policies on energy and climate that the Commission has put forward so far are gender blind. This is unacceptable when we know that women, children and older people are hardest hit by climate change and at a greater risk of poverty compared to men. Secondly, that's why, even though it may sound boring, we need gender disaggregated data and indicators at EU level and at national level. Having the right facts is fundamental if we want policies right that can ensure a socially fair transition to a fossil-free society. Finally, for a green and gender equal Europe, more women and other disadvantaged groups needs to be involved in the decision-making process.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Boyd, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and these are my top 3 steps for a green and gender equal Europe. Number 1, we need more women, girls, and gender diverse people in leadership positions. It's embarrassing that in 2023, only 1 in 6 ministers is a woman. Only 1 in 10 corporate CEOs is a woman. Number 2, we need to ensure that Europe recognizes the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for women, girls, gender diverse people, and all people. It's embarrassing that the European human rights system is the only regional system in the world that does not recognize the fundamental right to a healthy environment. And number 3, to my brothers out there, men must recognize and acknowledge our privilege and our power. We must support the empowerment of women, girls, and gender diverse persons as agents of change and environmental leaders. And we must take tangible action so that women, girls, and gender diverse people can enjoy their right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. For example, I am urging the UN Human Rights Council to replace me with a woman when my term expires next year. Finally, thanks to the European Institute for Gender Equality for this terrific campaign. Thank you.
Welcome back, and I'm very glad that you stayed with us till the end. I'm delighted to join now back in the studio Caroline Schiele, again the director of EIGE. And also, we are now joined by Dimitrios Papadimoulis. He's the Vice President of the European Parliament, and he deals with gender equality and diversity. So now I'll just give you the floor, Dimitrios, for the final remarks, and then we will come to Carl.
Thank you very much, Federica. I have the honor to chair a high-level group of the European Parliament since July 2014, which deals with equality and diversity. And I have to say that for us, the Gender Equality Index, for many, many years, it's not only a measuring tool, but an encouraging sign for a permanent fight to improve gender equality in all possible levels of the European Parliament. In the political sphere, we have 40% MEPs women, but the majority of the Bureau are women. The chair of the Parliament is a woman. We have a strong representation of women also as chair of or co-chairs of the political parties, the political groups, the committees, but also in the Parliament there are working thousands of people, so we are prepared, and it was adopted unanimously, a roadmap in order to improve the gender equality also in the administrative sphere in the Parliament. In the beginning of the last mandate, 2019, we had less than 40% women head of units. Now we are close to 50%, as was the goal that I had presented, and it was accepted. The same is for women directors, and we made an important improvement, but not sufficient, trying to break the glass ceiling. Women general directors. We started from 17%, now we are close to 30%, but it's not enough. We are working also trying to motivate women to ask for more. And that index that EIGE is presenting each year, it shows also serious inequalities between the member states. We have the Nordics going as pioneers quicker than us. We have other countries like my country, Greece, staying in the back. So I think that that tool, it's also an inspiring signal for us not to show only our progress, which is important, but also to put additional goals, more ambitious, for the years to come. And we are going close to the European elections. This will be the end of my mandate as chairing that high-level group for a period of 10 years. So I'm proud for the progress that we made in cooperation with the FAM committee, with EIGE, with other European institutions. But I have to say that there is a lot of work to be done, not only in the Brussels bubble, but also in the member states. I will give you an example. Poland. During the last 10 years, the steps were not for a progressive road, but backwards. So it is important to fight for gender equality all over the European Union in order to be capable to give lessons to the other part of the planet.
Thank you, Vice President. And with these inspiring words, I think we can move to you, Caroline. I would ask you to give us some final remarks after this very interesting, this very thought-provoking, I'd say, conference.
Well, thank you, Frederica. And indeed, we have reached the end of very rich discussions and debates today. I'm also happy to hear from many of the speakers that they see the index as an important instrument to provide data and information for their policy making. That's exactly also the goal, and I'm happy to hear that it works out that way. Also, I would like to reiterate that it's important to look into the future and to take positive and proactive steps. And I would like to repeat the 3 steps forward that EIGE sees for itself. So we will continue, that's the first step, we will continue to provide important evidence like we did today. We will also continue, secondly, to build coalitions and engage in conversations to find solutions. And thirdly, we will continue to share our know-how, important tools, good practices, so that we can also, in that sense, support policymakers. And I would like to thank you all for your participation today. And I would invite you all to define your 3 steps forward, because I sincerely believe that we have so much knowledge, so much power, and through joining forces for the future, I'm sure that together we can really move to a green and gender equal Europe. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you.